Well, there's now the Conservative MP, Mark Reckless, though the BBC's asked me simply to call him Mark Radical, and David Anderson QC, who's the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. Mark Reckless Radical, what would you like to do with Mr. Qatada? What do you think should be done with him?
I would like to send him back to Jordan. I think everyone's agreed he is a very dangerous man. Came here on a false passport in '93, applied for asylum, wasn't given. He's gone through every avenue, and I think our own highest court has determined that he can be sent back to Jordan, and we should respect that judgment rather than this foreign court.
How would you do that? Would you whisk him out in the middle of the night? Because if the government announced that it was going to defy the European Court and send him back, the government would immediately be injuncted by Mr. Qatada's lawyers.
Well, there's two ways. I mean, I understand the Prime Minister has spoken with the King of Jordan, and it...
that would be an agreement. Let me come to that in a minute. If there's not an arrangement, how would you send them back? Under what manner would you send them back?
Well, you said we'd be injuncted, but actually what Mr. Justice Mitting said was that we could not send him back without taking on the political and reputational cost, whatever that might now be, of defying a European court judgment. We've had a decision by our own highest court that he can be sent back, and that is what I would like to see.
I understand that, but I'm asking you about the practicalities of it, because unless you whisk him out in the middle of the night, his lawyers, if you announce you're going to do it regardless of the Strasbourg ruling, would immediately move in the courts to stop that from happening, and you would have to wait till that action then went through all the courts.
Well, I'm not sure that's the case, because the government would be acting contrary to an international treaty commitment, but it would be acting in line with the judgment of our highest court here. And I think what's now becoming clear, the Strasbourg court has gone so far off where it was, and is no longer, I think, a serious or credible court, that it is quite reasonable for the government to act on the basis of what our top court has, just as it is over the issue of prisoners' votes.
Well, let's get David Anderson's take on this particular issue. If the government decided, regardless of the Strasbourg court, even if there isn't another deal done in the desert with the Jordanians, we're going to send them back, could they just do that, or would they face more legal action that could delay them doing that?
Well, they could certainly face legal action. What the outcome of that would be, I don't know.
I understand.
I think more fundamentally, you've got to decide whether you want to be bound by this court or not. And if you want to be bound by it, you can't just pick and choose which judgments you
Well, the
choose
French
to obey.
and the Italians send these kind of people back, and they're still bound by it.
Well, from time to time, a judgment is not complied with. You mentioned prisoners voting. It's quite true. That judgment was 2005. We haven't complied with that one yet. But in general, people do comply with the court's judgments.
But on the particular, I mean, the French equivalents and the Italian equivalents of Abu Qatada were sent back to Algeria and Tunisia and other countries, even though the court had ruled against doing so. And last time I looked, the French and the Italians still have a judge each on the Strasbourg court as part of the 47.
Well, that's quite true. At the end of the day, the enforcement mechanism of the European Court is a political one. Enforcement happens in the Committee of Ministers. If a state is continually in breach, then you get into very difficult territory.
Well, Russia's continually in breach, and it's still a member.
Well, it's got a surprisingly good record, Russia, on most cases. There are certainly some. You could say the same of Turkey.
There are several hundred Russian cases which are in breach at the moment. Moldavia has several hundred as well.
Well, Italy has
Turkey has more than Moldavia, and almost as many as Russia.
Yes, well, the president of
But they're all members of the court.
The president of the court put it very well. The last president, in his farewell speech, he said that governments are often reluctant to comply, but they generally get round to it in the end.
You see, what the criticism is from Britain is that the Strasbourg court changed the goalposts. The Article 3 against torture is there are no caveats on that. And the British government went to the Jordanians to get an agreement that he would not be tortured if sent back. That then went before the Strasbourg court again, and the court said, yep, we like that, we'll have that, we accept that, but oh, hold on, he also can't face any evidence that's been extracted by torture. To which we said, well, you never mentioned that before.
Well, last time Abu Qatada went on trial in Jordan, he was convicted on the evidence of two men who had been tortured. They'd been drugged, they'd been sleep deprived, they'd been beaten on the soles of the feet. And what the Strasbourg court was saying is that if you want to send him back again, please could you get an assurance first from Jordan that that won't happen again. And far from moving the goalposts, all the Strasbourg court was doing was saying exactly what our own Court of Appeal said in 2008. The House of Lords, it's quite true,
well, yeah,
took a different view.
Excuse me, Mr. Alexander, the Court of Appeal was overruled by the Supreme Court.
It was indeed. By the House of Lords.
That's the second. You always mention the Court of Appeal. You never mention the Supreme Court.
Well, I've mentioned it
You did the same on the Today. You did the same on the Today program, and you know better than I. The Supreme Court is superior to the Court of Appeal.
Of course
why do you do that?
Why do I do it? Because I was addressing the question of, was the Court of Human Rights coming out of left field with something completely absurd and unprecedented? No, it wasn't. It was applying the law as it was in fact well understood, which is that
if we cannot get an agreement on evidence gained by torture that satisfies the European Court, is it your view we should withdraw from the European Court?
Yes, it is, but I would like to take as many people with us as possible, and I think trying to go through due process with Qatar to do everything possible, and what David Cameron is doing, trying to get reform of the court, it's going to be very difficult getting that agreed by 47.
Well, it's not going to happen this side of May, is it?
But I think by doing everything possible, I think that will then strengthen the ground were we to find it necessary to leave the court.
Would you remind our viewers of the only other European country that is not a member of the European Court?
The only other European country that's not a member is Belarus,
which is also the last totalitarian state in Europe.
Yeah. But also
these
other
would be
countries,
Britain and Belarus together.
But other countries, not that far short of Belarus, are appointing judges who are overruling, in this case, our own Supreme Court, and they went entirely off lit field on this. The only cases they looked at before, but entirely off the field of previous jurisprudence. The only cases that the Court of Appeal gave were ones relating to domestic trials in member states of the Convention. And then one of our law lords then says, well, no one's suggesting that you can't send anyone abroad just because their standards aren't as good as ours. And I'm afraid that what the European Court now is saying, and that's a complete revolution, and we need to deal with it.
Let me bring in our other guests. Let me go to John, but then I'll come to you, Zoe. I think a lot of people will want, given what the kind of things this guy has said, that if you are the son or a daughter of an apostate, you can be killed, legitimate to do so. We've seen his videos, they seem to have inspired at least some of those who took part in 9/11. People watching this program will wonder, how come we've got John Terry on trial and we can't put this guy on trial in Britain?
I think they will, and I think this latest the European Court is going to further contaminate people's dislike and distrust of
But
this
it's not
court.
the European Court's fault that we're not putting him on trial in England,
But
is
the
it?
Supreme Court should be, on a matter of national security, it should be the view of the court that prevails over a European court. That should be the end game. And Cameron should, as soon as he's secured some agreement with the King of Jordan, deport this man.
I think that's a bit ridiculous, frankly. You cannot blame Europeans in any shape or form for the fact that we won't put him on trial ourselves. If we've got a problem with Britain, I mean, obviously the two arguments against it are A, if it were an open court it would compromise other investigations, and B, that we then have to pay for his prison care for the amount of time that he's in prison. And I can see both those points, but we have to take on both those points. We can't just invoke the EHC. I mean, you can't
seriously want this man running. He's going to be a curfew, but for 2 hours a day he's going to be allowed to wander freely.
I'm not saying I want
He's
that,
a security threat.
I'm saying if he's that much of a risk, it is very strange that we can't try him ourselves. But secondly, I think if you do want to walk away from Europe, it's a little bit reckless to assume that we won't then have to have a Bill of Rights of our own.
I haven't said that.
You know,
at the moment we have the Human Rights Act and our domestic law, and our top judges have decided it's okay to send him back to Jordan, but then that's overruled by someone else's interpretation of the convention. We should have either or, not both.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I think you're both going to be on a lot of programs like this because we've not yet resolved prisoners' votes either, so plenty to keep us busy. We like keeping lawyers busy because they don't get well paid and with nothing to do.